Bonjour à tous et bienvenue. I'd like to welcome you to the Digital Academy's event on Understanding Data in a Digital Age, what public servants need to know. So first, I'd like to welcome all participants to the event, whether you're here in person in Ottawa or whether you have joined us online. Veuillez noter que l'interprétation simultanée est offerte dans les deux langues officielles aux participants qui se trouvent dans la salle et à ceux qui se joignent à nous par web diffusion. Pour les participants dans la salle, les casques d'écoute se trouvent à l'arrière du salon. Pour les participants par web diffusion, choisissez la langue de votre choix directement à partir de l'interface. Whether you're joining us via YouTube or on site, please submit your questions via slido.com. The code is #UDDA. You can submit your questions at any time during the event, as well as vote for the questions that are of interest to you. At the end of the event, we will have a Q&A period, and the most popular questions will be asked to the panel members. Also, during the event, we'll be testing out a platform called Kahoot for the first time. Kahoot is an interactive game-based question and answer platform, and we hope you'll enjoy it, and it'll provide us with some very interesting discussion points. Finally, please be aware that this session may be recorded for the purpose of the Canada School of the Public Services activities and may be reused in the future through different platforms for a variety of purposes related to learning. So we're going to get going with a question from Kahoot. Okay, so first, how to join Kahoot. To join the Kahoot session, you'll need to open a new web page on your mobile device or computer and go to kahoot.it, kahoot.it. You can see it on the screen, K-A-H-O-O-T. You will then need to enter a session code, which is displayed on the screen. The session code is 445717. Enter this code and a nickname. Pour accéder à la session Kahoot, vous devrez ouvrir une nouvelle page web sur votre appareil mobile ou votre ordinateur et aller à l'adresse web kahoot.it. Vous devrez ensuite entrer le code de session affiché à l'écran et un pseudonyme. When we start the session, the questions and answer options will be displayed on the screens here in the room and on the web. Only when a question is active will you be able to select the answer of your choice using your phone or computer. So we're going to get going with, we've got 70 players. We'll give it a little bit more. And then I will ask you the first question. Okay, so folks are coming in. So can we go to the question? Big data analytics is helping governments to l'analytique de données massives aide des gouvernements à, et on a des 4 réponses. Donc veuillez choisissez la réponse de vos choix. So I think we've got the answers coming in. We'll give it another 15 seconds. Okay, un peu plus. I love seeing the numbers keep going up. It's Pavlovian. OK. Peut-être on peut commencer? All right. So the answers. We have 26 for understanding the needs of citizens, comprendre les besoins des citoyens. We have 10 for create better policies, créer des meilleures politiques. We have 6 for target resources more efficiently, cibler les ressources plus efficacement, and 170 for all of the above. So, as the title of today's event is what all public servants need to know, the answer, probably not surprisingly, is numéro 4. Okay? Data is used across all different elements of the public service and government in order to do our work. The average public servant or folks working at their desk day to day might not feel that the day discussion is about them and that it doesn't really have a connection to everything that they live day by day. But data is everyone's business. We've been talking about a digital revolution or a digital transformation in government and in our society. Data lies at the heart of this transformation. Anyone who's talking about artificial intelligence or machine learning is talking about data. Anyone who's talking about bias or effective services is talking about data. And anyone who is talking about our society, our environment, is also talking about data. The data underlies everything that we are doing in government and in other sectors of our economy and our country. Des événements comme celui-ci permettent de veiller à ce que les autres soient conscients de l'importance des données. Ils nous aident aussi à étaler au-delà de la sensibilisation, à partager nos connaissances, à établir des liens clés et maintenir l'engagement à tous. Events like this are extremely important to bring us together and to build the community that we need to understand data. I'm also very pleased to announce that the school is co-hosting with the Department of National Defence the 4th annual Government of Canada Data Conference, planned for February 13th and 14th in 2020 here in Ottawa. This builds on the success of the 2019 Data Conference, and the upcoming event will focus on the people, processes, and tools that enable data to create value for Canadians and manage data for better evidence-based decisions. Our colleagues will have an amazing 2 days planned for you, so please save the dates now, and we look forward to seeing you there. Events like this are also an important part of the Digital Academy. For those who haven't heard about the Digital Academy, we are a learning branch of the Canada School of the Public Service, and our focus is on bringing the skills, competencies, and mindsets for a digital age to public servants from coast to coast to coast. We were launched just over a year ago to build these digital skills and mindsets. And this was an investment by the Canada School of the Public Service based on the increasing recognition that we need these skills all throughout our organizations, and that we need to do more to support you in building and developing these skills. The Digital Academy focuses on the streams of data analysis, AI and machine learning, design thinking, development, DevOps, and then the mindsets and the culture piece, which arguably is the most important. How can we become more agile organizations? How can we make sure when we are doing design work that we are focusing on the needs of our citizens, that we are building inclusive services, and understanding that services are not just web pages, but also our policies, regulations, and legislation. Doing this effectively means that we need to work very closely with a number of partners. We need to be in constant alignment with the government's digital standards and the data strategy roadmap, both of which were launched last year. We need to always be thinking about putting our citizens and our users at the center and keeping up with their diverse needs. And we need to rethink about how we harness and how we use new technologies and data to enable and empower our users and our learners. Aussi, il faut que nous établissions un leadership solide et dévoué à tous les niveaux qui agissent comme ambassadeurs pour nous aider à favoriser et à faire progresser une fonction publique forte axée sur le numérique. We need to constantly innovate and upskill. Continuous learning needs to be a part of every person's vocabulary. The world is moving faster today than it ever has before. Tomorrow, it will move faster than today. We need to be in a space where we are constantly updating and constantly thinking about where we need to be. And this can be a scary thing. Et finalement, we also need to bring in and learn from people outside of government. And you're going to have the opportunity to do this today. To hear from experts such as the amazing people who've joined us here this afternoon to help us build these skills and knowledge. So one of the key areas for us is that the Government of Canada is responsible for delivering accessible, inclusive, and relevant services to all people in our country. This means we cannot just look at the Bay Area or the Silicon Valley and say we want to be like Facebook. Frankly, we need to do better. We need to build services that are inclusive, that recognize that we have minorities and we have people that data does not speak to or does not speak about, and whose narratives are not included in the services that we have today. And we need to find ways to include them. The fact is that when we understand data, we can better understand the people we serve, and we can provide better services. Data is also not just about numbers. Data is qualitative as well. It is videos, sound bites. It is letters that people have written. It is qualitative research that is done, ethnographic research. All of these things are data points, and all of these things are important to get a story. It is not just about web clicks. It is not just about hard numbers or dollars and cents, and these are the things that we need to build. And we're not alone in this. All across all of the sectors, the need for better understanding and ability and competencies around data have been seen. According to BrainStation, data scientists, operations, and consultants are the number 5 and 6 best jobs in Canada. This highlights the importance of data in the business world. According to a recent report from the Information Communication and Technology Council, or ICTC, the bigger the role data continues to play, the more opportunity there will be for people who specialize in putting this data to use. And the amount of data we create with wearables and the Internet of Things, and this will be enabled even more when 5G communications comes into place. More and more data will be created, and more considerations will need to be factored into the work that we do in government and beyond. So this session is one of the ways we're trying to respond to that shift. But we realize that it will take commitment, sustained investment, and collaboration. I would point you towards the Government of Canada's Data Strategy Roadmap, which was launched late the past summer. And departments and agencies are doing their piece. As I mentioned, the Digital Academy has just recently launched its 2nd cohort, so we're working to upskill our folks. And we firmly believe that these are skills that public servants can and must learn, and that together we can come together to actually do much better for our citizens. And finally, we have all of the other partners, your departments, your agencies, who are all looking at how to modernize, how to transform, and how to build increasing relevance in a world where things are constantly changing around us. So when we say this is what every public servant needs to know, we say it for a reason. This is what you need to know. This is what your managers and your executives and your deputy ministers need to know. And this is what we need in order to take the public service into the future. So I'm going to shut up now because I've been talking quite a while. So please help me in welcoming Professor Joy Johnson, Vice President of Research and International at Simon Fraser University, who will be doing the opening remarks in just a moment. Fred Popowich, Scientific Director of Big Data at SFU. Luba Peterson, that's right, Associate Professor, the Department of Economics at Simon Fraser University. Ryan Hum, is Ryan here? Okay, Ryan Hum, okay, hopefully online. Vice President of Data and Chief Information Officer at the National Energy Board of Canada. Ian Stewart, Product Lead for Data Solutions at the Bank of Canada. And our moderator, Francis Bilodeau, the Acting Chief Information Officer of Canada at the Treasury Board Secretariat. So before I turn it over to Professor Johnson, let me tell you just a little bit about her. She has quite a long bio, so I'm going to be succinct and hit the top points. So Joy leads Simon Fraser University's strategic research initiatives and facilitates international opportunities within her organization. Her work focuses on facilitating research excellence and helping the university respond to new opportunities. And she's been building on her long-standing research, leadership and research experience, working with faculty, students, and staff to secure research partnerships within the community and industry. A key element of her work focuses on knowledge mobilization and facilitating opportunities to transfer the results of SFU research to society. Joy is a leader for the SFU Innovates initiative, a university-wide strategy and action plan to inspire, develop, and support impact-driven innovation and entrepreneurship. Over to you, Joy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. I am so impressed with the work that you're doing in terms of providing educational opportunities for the public service. It's my pleasure to be here in snowy Ottawa, escaping the rain in Vancouver, and to join you today. And really, it's an honor to be partnering with the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat and the Canada School of Public Service to speak with such a large group of dedicated federal public servants. I know that all of you work very, very hard to maintain a standard of service and professionalism for each of your departments, and we're really grateful for that. Our goal here today is to inspire you. We hope by the end of this panel session you'll be excited, as we are at Simon Fraser University, about the power and the promise of big data and advanced data analytics. Much like precision medicine, data has the potential to inform policy, precisely predict program outcomes, and target finite government resources more efficiently. Most importantly, we can now more effectively analyze the needs of our citizens. Data is evolving our frameworks for emergency response, enabling a new era of improved readiness. We're using analytics to detect anomalies and irregular behavior to prevent money laundering and financial crime. Agencies can better understand the workforce gaps that could develop as staff retire or leave for the private sector. So we're in the midst of a data transformation that is no less disruptive than the introduction of the internet. This can be a bit daunting, and I certainly appreciate that. I am not a data analytics expert, but I'm certain that our panelists today will demonstrate how the benefits far outweigh the challenges that we have before us. This is indeed why SFU's Big Data Initiative is a central resource for all of our faculties and disciplines across the university, because we recognize that developing our data capacity universally will improve our research outcomes and help build a community of applied data experts. And as Canada's engaged university, we are working with government, with community and industry partners across the country to grow our national capacity in big data. Our undergraduate and graduate student programs work on a variety of research challenges that include projects in public health, mental health and the justice system, and health delivery and social justice. Today, we want to share the outcomes of some of these case studies to illustrate a potential roadmap on how all of us can get started and how we can overcome some of the common roadblocks that we experience when we're initiating new data programs. The panel is going to explore issues related to privacy, ethical use of data, and how the role of partnerships can help overcome these challenges. It's interesting. I just want to give you with one example from Simon Fraser University about the power of data. British Columbia's recently standardized testing of everyone between the ages of 18 to 70 years old for HIV, and this was based on new knowledge obtained from advanced data modeling. Working with the government, BC's hospitals, and our public health data, Simon Fraser University's Dr. Boden Nosek determined that standard testing could save the provincial government $66.5 million over the course of 25 years. Using advanced analytics, he was able to determine that this type of screening would help to avert new infections, help to delay or avoid costly hospital stays, and enable people living with HIV to stay in the workplace, saving millions in health spending, and indeed improving quality of life. So this is just one example of a plethora of examples of how data innovations are empowering government departments. Collectively, I believe that we all need to think of big data as the science of the better, ways in which we can improve our services, we can find new ways of moving forward. By unlocking knowledge in advanced data analytics, you can make your departments more cost-effective, reduce unnecessary guesswork, and achieve better outcomes, hence that box number 4. So before we get started, I'd also like to note that in addition to this panel, we're going to be sharing a few resources and a guide to help you get started with your data journey or enable you with your current data projects. I'm really looking forward to the panel and learning from all of you today. I wish you all the success in the challenges that you face. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joy. And with that, we will turn it over to our moderator, Francis Bilodeau.
Why don't we, thank you. So perhaps I'll invite the panelists to come on me up front. And we'll start with the first session, which is get to know your panelists. So I'll ask each of our panel members to introduce themselves, parler un peu d'eux-mêmes, de leur expérience, de leur relation avec les données. And do we know if we have Ryan joining online? I know we were having some technical difficulties.
Oh, there he is. I'm here.
So,
hello? He's in the corner. Hello?
Voilà. And we have Ryan, who has just joined us. Commencer par me présenter un peu moi-même. Francis Bilodeau, je suis le dirigeant par intérim ou dirigeant principal par intérim des informations pour le gouvernement du Canada. It is an exciting time to be in this type of role, and it's an exciting time for all of you to be thinking about digital. Our relationship with information, our relationship with data has changed. Data, which used to be location dependent, stopped being location dependent the day we brought in computers and made them separate from the medium, and the day we brought in networks, which meant that data could be anywhere in the world. Data also stopped being person dependent. There was a time where chacun d'entre vous, nous, étions ceux qui créaient les données. Then social media meant that people all around the world were creating data at once. And now we're in a world where data is being created instantly, not by people, but by machines. The Internet of Things has changed dramatically the amount of data that's being produced. You've heard stats like this before. Every year now, more data is being produced than in the history of the world. That's because machines are producing the data, and things like AI are now producing data based on data, changing tremendously our relationship. That means for us as civil servants, we need to be thinking differently about our own relationship with data and our own capacity to leverage this new world to be able to bring public good. So I'm really excited to be on this panel today. I'm excited to be in front of you. Heureux d'avoir ces discussions avec vous. Donc je vais commencer avec Luba. Je vais demander de se présenter, to say a little bit about yourself, sort of your fields of interest, and then we'll move down the line.
Okay, so I'm Luba Peterson. I'm an associate professor at Simon Fraser University. And I'm also an academic member of the Center for Economic Policy and Research group on central bank communication. I've been consulting with the Bank of Canada and advising them for the last 7 years on topics related to central bank communication and monetary policy design. And my work typically or mostly focuses on behavioral macroeconomic questions, in particular how to create data about how people form beliefs about the economy and how they make financial and economic decisions. We're particularly interested in understanding how do people use data, information, and central bank communication to form beliefs and make decisions. And we have to create this data because there's generally a lack of data out there. While we have a lot of administrative data, we often don't have the right data to inform our models and to inform our policy. So by going to the lab, where we have people making decisions in particularly controlled environments, we can more clearly identify how different pieces of information or different stimulus influence their behavior.
Thank you.
Okay.
And Fred.
Merci, je suis Fred Popovich, je suis directeur scientifique de l'initiative de mégadonnées, l'Université Simon Fraser, où je suis aussi professeur d'informatique. My background really comes from, I actually received my PhD in artificial intelligence and cognitive science many years ago, and seem to have landed in a computing science department. But my interest has always been in terms of the use of data and the kind of data that is in all of our lives, which is, a lot of it is that unstructured data, the information written in ordinary language. So as part of the Big Data Initiative and my research program, I've been able to see how we've been able to bring together different data sources, whether it be the structured information, like we were saying, comes from all of our devices, or the unstructured information, which is in all of our emails, reports, and tweets. And do that for not only dealing with technological advances, but how does that improve society? What can we do to help with the training and the transformation of society?
That's great. And Ian, the view from the Bank of Canada.
So I'm a product lead for data solutions for the bank. My primary responsibility is to oversee 4 independent teams focused on DevOps operations who support both legacy and transformational data projects that support actually the economists at the bank and the economic analysis and monetary policy design that needs to happen. We focus around things like data pipelines, data dissemination, as well as the platform itself, as well as a fairly robust computational analytic platform. I have been involved in data for a long time. I started my career at the City of Toronto as an operational planning analyst, crunching massive amounts of data to determine which roads needed resurfacing and which things need to be doing. And to me, I've always sort of been wowed and interested by the questions that data can answer for me, whether that be personally within my job or in the world around me. And I look forward to enabling most at the bank, enabling our economists with the latest tools and the latest technologies to empower them to be able to answer the questions that the bank needs to answer. While data is being transformed around the world, the questions that we need to answer from a central bank and a financial stability perspective are resoundingly complex, and they're changing every day. And how do me enabling my team create the solutions that enable us to be able to answer those questions for Canadians?
Great. And rounding out our panel, Ryan, I had the pleasure recently of getting a bit of a demo from Ryan and his team around what they're doing around data visualizations. I would say an example for a lot of us within the government doing really exciting things. Ryan, over to you.
Hi, my name is Ryan. I'm the VP of Data and CIO at the Canada Energy Regulator. We look at data and information on 3 different levels. One is how do we use data for regulatory efficiency? I think that's obvious. But the more exciting stuff, I think, is how do we use data and information for digital engagement? And how do we use data to prevent harm to people and the environment? One of the things, so I just joined the organization not too long ago, and one of the things that I'm rethinking about is, yes, we have this role as a regulator, but we're a de facto library about the people and our environment. So any time we have a pipeline project that comes in, we get a ton of information about the environment, about the communities that are impacted. We have soil sampling and fish habitat monitoring. And so we have this rich collection of data that we could actually provide to people to make different decisions with. My background is I'm career ADD. I'm a public servant, primary, dad, but I've jumped around degrees in engineering and biology and product design. My graduate work was in global health and epidemiology, but I was actually in the engineering department. And I think I just like learning how other people think. So, yeah.
So essentially a one-man multidisciplinary team right there in Ryan.
It gets loud in my head.
Au niveau du format, on va commencer avec des questions modérées pour chacun des panels. We will have the opportunity through this also to be asking each of you questions through Kahoot, which we saw. Et puis à la fin, on va avoir des discussions pour les personnes qui sont ici aujourd'hui. Donc je vous encourage à prendre avantage du fait qu'on a des experts ici aujourd'hui avec nous, to listen to what they're saying through the sessions and think about where you'd like to be able to dig a little bit deeper once we get into the questions from the audience. So our first question, and recognizing we sort of went this way, we will start from Ryan and work our way back on the next one. Yeah, I know, the thumbs down from Ryan. So, but first one is, how well do we actually feel we understand data? to what extent do government academics have a pulse of what we need to be able to understand data? What does it actually mean to understand data and to be able to leverage it? And what are some of the strategies that we can collectively use to up our data literacy capacity? Et donc, je vais d'abord me tourner vers Ryan.
Those are a lot of questions.
They give you a lot of space.
So, I don't think we actually know very much right now. I think any organization that says that they've cracked the code to understand how to be more data-driven or this is the secret sauce is probably lying. Particularly organizations that have existed beyond the last 10 years, right? That started out with paper or started out with individual transactions. And I think that that's okay because if we start thinking about it, so I've started using this analogy around firefighting, right, and forestry. I think too often we think about pruning the trees so that there's no more fires, where what we really should be doing is thinking about that we have a grassland and we're planting a whole bunch of seeds and we're seeing what works. And so I've been thinking about it in that way around maybe we don't know and that's okay and let's try a whole bunch of things. Last week I've been talking about a maturity model artificially in our organization, and I ran a survey using David Eves from Harvard, his maturity model on digital transformation. And so about 10% of our organization answered it, from senior management down to officer levels. And the variability of the answers was all over the place, right? So a lot of people thought that we had a really amazing cross-organizational platform of data and this great structure to fund projects. I personally don't think that, but that's okay. And I think having that conversation, having that survey actually allowed us to start thinking about, well, there are different aspects of what it means to be data mature, right? Everything from user-centered design to the skills to actually being able to fund these projects. And so that's my answer so far. Check out David's digital transformation maturity model, but that there are no answers, and I don't think that we actually know.
Great. All right. What do you, Ian?
Sure.
How well do you think we know data? And appreciate any anecdotes or thoughts you might have specifically from the bank's perspective. How well does the bank know data?
Well, I think it depends on which department you ask. Economists have a strong understanding of the data that they receive on a regular basis because they ask routine questions and they're consistently taking that and crunching that data in different ways. The challenge is that a lot of the data that we want to talk about today isn't the routine data that we know. It's the data that we don't know. It's sentiment analysis and macro data questions. We recently brought in 60 terabytes of fine scale microtransactional data, and there was this real impetus. We had to get it in. We struggled because I didn't know where to put it. We didn't have anything big enough. How do you bring that data through anything? You can't. So we had to create these secure hard drives where we had to move the data from one location, and someone had to sit in a secure closet, literally in a closet, with a video camera plugging that data in and getting the data in. Got the data in, and no one knew what question to ask it. So it's this, I need the data, I need this, I know there's something there, but it takes us so long to get it there, and then the question is what are you going to use it for? What's the value of that data? And so when we talk about maturity, we need to talk about the questions that we want to ask and then try to look for what is the information that allows us to ask those questions. It's hard. It's hard, especially when we're dealing with legacy hardware and legacy systems that don't allow the easy access and the ready access to get that data in quickly to be able to ask those questions. And sometimes we look at digital transformation and data maturity from a purely technical perspective or a purely technical lens. We don't look at it from the OCM and the change in the organizational change management component, which is, are we even ready to talk about consuming this data? Like, just from a people perspective, the technology's out there. I can deposit a data lake and create a pipeline. That's not a problem. But are you ready to utilize and take advantage of the information that's there? And if it is, are we really spending the money on the right thing at the right time? And how do we ask those questions to create the foundation for our questions and the foundation for our culture to be, sort of data-driven and digitally ready with before we sort of implement the technology?
Great. So, Fred, same question, but slightly different. So you have a bit of an expertise around big data, around AI. So how well do we know data, but how will AI and big data affect our capacity to understand data? And how are we going to be collectively being able to equip ourselves in a world where some of the underlying sources of data may become more and more opaque to more and more of us?
Okay, it's a good follow-on question, because I can build on that from what we've heard already so far. So the issue, in terms of, just to summarize the comments we've heard so far, we have a long history of understanding data, but the game has now changed, because we talked to our friends at StatsCan. They've been understanding data for a long time, and in many organizations. And it ties into what's changed now is not only the amounts of data, the variety of data, and the sources of data we're dealing with, but it's also now, what you alluded to, the technology and the mechanisms. And the technology and mechanisms can't be viewed on their own, and that's where the people fall into it. And people are always saying, oh, is AI going to be the solution to this, or how does AI work with data? The thing that I like to say, putting it in that context, is now with the AI technologies and mechanisms we have in place, that is actually can be a mechanism to help humans or help existing processes to improve those processes, or to make help the humans doing their kind of jobs. Because ultimately, when we're making decisions, like you're saying, we need to know what are the right questions to ask of this data. And in order to know what the right questions to ask, you need to have the humans there that know their domain, that whether dealing with health crises, whether we're dealing with climate emergencies and things like that. By being able to then use the newly developed tools and bringing together the vast different sources of data. That's where the opportunities are with the new data and the new AI, and including the Internet of Things, all these new devices that are giving us additional data. But as we have seen through history, and this ties into the whole thing about what does it really mean to understand data? What does it really mean to understand nuclear fission or fusion? We saw all those years ago this great opportunity for energy for everyone, but as with any, whether it be the printing press or fission, fusion, it's a double-edged sword. And that's why we have to have these discussions in terms of how does it fit in with our existing processes, but what is the dark side of this, which it's good that we're having these open discussions on that. But really, I think in terms of, we do have a good understanding of data, we have to have a good understanding of our individual processes that we're involved with, so that we can figure out how data and how AI can fold into those processes as we go forward.
So just your reference there, how much do we understand sort of nuclear fusion, et cetera, made me think of quotes I read recently. So a while back, I think it was The Economist that came back with the quote, widely quoted, data is the new oil, speaking to the value of it. More recently, I saw an article that said data is the new plutonium, speaking to the dangers of that may be associated to some data. Interesting, I think, two snippets of thoughts around data. That's sort of.
And an interesting thing, let's find the middle ground, which is very Canadian. Well, actually, data is the new uranium-238, because on its own, with a can-do technology, we can solve this.
So Luba, on this one, sort of bring us home. You've sort of heard your colleagues, your thoughts on how well we understand data. Okay,
well, from an economist perspective, we're constantly looking at data, and it's very clear to us that regardless of what your data set is, there's going to be problems with it. We never have the perfect data. And so we've got a very vibrant field in economics econometrics just dedicated to developing tools to understand data. And we've got econometricians continually building new techniques to look at problematic data, like missing data, bias sampling, so on. So I feel that we're continually moving in the right direction in terms of building tools to analyze data, but it may be that the academic community is a little bit behind where they should be in terms of being aware of the actual data that is there. So there's a need for academics to work with industry and government agencies to understand what is the actual data sets that are available and what kind of tools are necessary to analyze that data. Now, with regards to data sharing and data access, you know, I hear a lot of challenges from applied economists about getting access to data in Canada. Now, there are very good reasons we have such high security of our data, but that has resulted in younger researchers who don't have as much time to wait around for data to actually use Canadian data. They go and access foreign or European data sets which are much more readily available rather than work on Canadian data. So I think we need to be asking ourselves, what's the trade-off of all this high securitization of our data? There needs to be a proper cost-benefit analysis of the risks and benefits associated with high levels of security, and actually look at what are the consequences of, say, data breaches.
Oh, great. So on that point, interesting question around the cost of securing data. Pour ceux d'entre nous qui travaillent dans la fonction publique, question aussi social license. What is our degree of social license or acceptability of using data? We have an interesting case study for us around StatsCan recently in the use of bank data, and a fairly important sort of pushback on that. So for us, I think it actually highlights the importance of conversations like today, of being able to engage across the civil service, but for each of us to be able to engage with our own constituencies, with Canadians around. What are the trade-offs around data? How do we use data and how do we secure data? We need to engage on those dialogues on a consistent way if we're going to be able to get the social license to use the data. Et maintenant, je pense qu'on s'en allait à Kahoot. We've heard from our panel members. Now it's time to see how well our own audience members understand data. So entering sort of the pin that is in front of you, 149134. The question is, poor data management can result in what? 1, loss of profit. 2, errors in decision making. 3, misleading results. 4, poor applications of government services. Or 5, all of the above. Je pense we have some players, and there you go. There's our quiz. Donc, des erreurs décisionnelles, des résultats trompeurs, une mauvaise application des services, ou toutes ces réponses. Le poor data management can result in. La mauvaise gestion des données peut avoir comme résultat des erreurs décisionnelles, des résultats trompeurs, des mauvaises applications, ou c'est toutes ces réponses, toutes ces réponses. We will wait one more minute as answers are still driving up. Donc, je vais regarder nos techniciens derrière et qui me feront signe quand on pense qu'on a assez de résultats. And correct. I think most of the people got it, all of the above. So 8 for errors in decision making, 0 for misleading results, 2 for mauvaise application des services gouvernementaux. So on to our sort of next round of questions for the panelists here. This one on data blindness, or failure to act on available data. So what does data blindness actually mean? How does it manifest itself in organizations, yours or others? And how can we increase our our respective capacities to act and use data intelligently. I'm actually going to start with Fred on this one.
Okay, in terms of this one, I think and we've seen this term used for a while in terms of that's being overwhelmed and resulting in inaction is the key problem. And the challenge is, if you take a look, whenever you're seeing data blindness or something like that, what are the underlying causes? I think, and from my perspective, the underlying causes are definitely focused on the wide range of resources we now have available to get the data, and the way that basically the other aspect of it is being able to know how accurate that data is. In terms of, that's where the key challenges are, because you can imagine, and we heard, I was at an event recently where they were basically talking about even when people have to come to important decisions, if a decision has to be made, you need to have the team there to help you interpret the data. So it's very difficult for important decisions, and it's already in our work processes already. Depending on the importance of the decision, it has to be, you need expertise from a range of different areas. So, and I think the biggest challenge which we're seeing even as individuals, when we're taking a look at, and we're seeing it reinforced by whether it be through social media, by what social media channels people choose to follow for their information, whether people are looking at the news agencies now for their news, for their data, for their information, or whether they're finding their own sources. So I would say that the aspect of this is being able to find ways, and where you're seeing a range of things now, making sure that and this is the aspect of people always were talking about the veracity of data, you know, all the different V's. You had the volume, you had the velocity, the variety, and veracity in terms of determining how truthful is your data. And that is, we've seen it in the media in terms of public information in unstructured text. There is that same information in the structured field, which we've even seen in aerospace. Like, is the data that you're getting from the sensor correct or not? And how will that affect the performance of an aircraft? So I think that is where the critical aspect is.
And an interesting thought for us in the civil service. Avant d'être dans la position où je suis en ce moment, j'étais au bureau du conseil privé où on m'avait demandé d'établir l'unité des résultats de livraison pour le Premier ministre. And the main objective of that one was to be able to draw from insights and draw from data to inform decisions at the Prime Minister's level. And at that time, we went out to deputy ministers and we asked them a fairly simple question. And this is 4 years ago. We've improved drastically since then. But we asked them, do you have a line of sight, or do you know what key data you hold from citizens or businesses? Do you know your data assets? And the overwhelming response from most deputy ministers was no. And so just in terms of capacity to use the data, there's a precondition, which is to know what you have, what you collect, and the quality of that data. So maybe moving to Luba. So same question. Data blindness. What is it? How can we avoid it? What do we do?
Okay. So this is exactly what I've been focusing my research on with the Bank of Canada, is how are average Canadians data blind? So how do they use data effectively or ineffectively to form their own beliefs and to make financial and economic decisions? And one thing we're finding is that consistent across all walks of life, households, firms, professional forecasters, even the central bankers, people use data suboptimally. When they have the opportunity to collect new data, they don't. And when they do get new data, they don't use it in a consistent way or in an optimal way. And that might not seem surprising, but to an average person, but to economists who think that, you know, people behave rationally with all the information they have, that's quite troubling. And so the question is, well then, how can we present statistics or information to the public in a way that they'll pay attention to and be able to effectively digest? And one thing we found from our laboratory experiments is that people consistently rely on relatable data and information to inform their beliefs. So they gravitate to information that is either easily physically accessible, so it's, you know, very quick to access, it's personally relatable, and it's actually more qualitative. So people are reluctant to use numerical information. They'd rather use qualitative information like language and imagery to inform their beliefs and decisions. So there's we may, as economists and central bankers, have to start thinking about other ways of communicating to a more human audience our information in a way that's more digestible.
So does that mean that if there's too much data, people rely on impressions?
Yes, certainly.
So going with that, actually, that's a good segue, I think, to the Bank of Canada.
Okay. To admit here, I've never actually encountered the term data blindness. So I'm going to sort of lay that on the table before I dive into my sort of viewpoint and sort of the impressions from the Bank of Canada. We especially in the area that I work in, the economists create data. So not only are they consumers of data and ultimately data scientists when it comes to combining data in different and unique ways, they also produce results. And one of the big challenges we have is that we know the data we ingest. I know where I put it. What I don't know is after that point what the economist decides to do with it. And then the question is that we then create duplication. A tremendous amount of duplication of effort, rather than having a holistic understanding of what's all of the data available. So someone who just went off and did some Canadian banking analysis produces some pretty impressive results, some great visualizations, puts it on their local file store. Somebody comes on and says, oh, I want to use Canadian housing data. Well, okay, I'll go over and I'll build it, and they do it, and they literally sit. We have an example where, I was told not to do that. They literally
For people in the crowd, we all had to swear on the Bible
we
before
did.
this and read a whole chart that said we will not touch our...
Yeah, and I completely did not listen to that, apparently. People who sit right beside each other, not communicating or not knowing that they equally created the same data set. And so to me, when we talk about data and data creation, it's also about searchability. It's about being able to find that data, to be able to know that there's a repository to find that data where you can go and get it. I think the other side for public servants, especially people who create data and create visualizations for consumption, I think there's a great risk that we assume that the data we see is correct. We make a lot of assumptions that if it's pretty, it's accurate. And we've at the bank have started to use Tableau heavily, and one of the interesting things we've seen is that the data is telling a story and people are taking actions on that story, but that story is false. Or assumptions are made about that data and that those assumptions are false. And it's not because the producer of the data or the gatherer of the data had any malintentions to purposefully make things difficult or more difficult for the people who would be making the decisions, but it's hard to tell when data is not accurate, especially the further removed you get from the subject matter expert about that data. We producing constant information about capacity analysis. Do we know that capacity data that's getting into the system is accurate? Are there cultural reasons why that data would be specifically inaccurate, and therefore using it represents a potential risk to the organization and the decisions we make? And so I see blindness on both sides. It's this idea that we assume things are absolutely correct when we perceive them or receive them, but also this ability to find data and not knowing what's there has a duality of impact on our consumption and our ability to react in the right way.
So a couple of interesting thematics, and maybe I'll ask Ryan to sort of pick up on them. So the quality and truthfulness of data, an element. And then another element that sort of comes to the forefront often is our choice in how we present certain data, or the data we present themselves may in many ways represent our own inherent biases or thoughts or assumptions on data. So Ryan, maybe picking up on that, on the theme of data blindness, but also on the notion of how we use data and the potential pitfalls around how we use and present data. Maybe your thoughts on that, Ryan.
Great segue. I actually love that we're talking about humans and humans interacting with data. So I love the comments about behavioral economics. Confirmation bias is something that I think about all the time. So the tendency to search for answers that you previously believed or that confirm your hypothesis. I also think about status quo bias, where a change is perceived as a loss. Actually, I'll land the plane a little bit. The question that we just asked around poor data management could result in errors in decision-making, misleading results, poor application of government services, or all of the above. And then we move to a conversation around inaction, around taking action on our data. We just really reinforce this idea of if you don't have perfect data, you shouldn't take any action. And that you should be fearful of the errors in decision-making, misleading results, and poor application. I mean, that's the perfect example of how we think about things a little bit differently.
Great. So our next question is going to be on data analytics, but first I'm going to is there anybody who'd like to react to anything the other panelists have said in sort of this round? Fred, I see.
Yeah.
Yep.
In terms of that, you raised a very good point, the focus of inaction and the threat. This ties in with the double-edged sword again in terms of this, because based on this, we cannot, this is why it's important to have the human in the loop and not just one person in the loop, because inaction can be as dangerous as taking the wrong action. And being able to have those frank discussions, I just wanted to reinforce that one point, that inaction can be a problem, but taking the wrong action can be a problem, but inaction can be a problem. So,
I also want to add that yes, data may be imperfect, but that doesn't mean we have to just settle for imperfect data. We can always go and create data, either get within our own departments, go out and do additional surveying or conduct experiments online. We can improve the data sets.
I'd like to also expand on that, because we've had a lot of decent conversations at the bank about the data quality, or the issue around data quality actually has analysis and context to it. So if you look at data sets, there was a particular situation where we were specifically ensuring data quality of a particular data set, but the response came back saying, but the lack of information or the misinformation has as much value as the accurate information.
Yeah.
So when we're focused on quality over the information that we're trying to get at, we potentially lose insight. We lose the ability to make informed decisions, because the absence of information is equally as important as the information being present.
yeah.
On va passer à l'analyse des données, so specifically on data analytics. I think a lot's being said around data analytics. It is sort of everywhere in our environment. Countries like New Zealand are actually drawing tremendous insights in terms of the life interactions between citizens and government, and then how they tailor their interactions. Private companies are using data analytics to think about and affect the customer experience at the individual level. Here in governments, we've created these positions. A lot of you may be in relationship with those in your departments around chief data officers. My old unit at PCO is still advancing work to do data visualization and present information to incoming prime ministers so they can support decision making. Comment pensez-vous que l'utilisation et l'analyse des données vont influencer notre capacité de créer des bonnes politiques, des bons programmes et d'offrir un meilleur service aux citoyens dans l'avenir? How do you think the data analytics will change or impact how we think and how we develop policies, laws, or deliver services to Canadians in the future? Do you have examples of the power of data analytics in terms of changing how we do things, either from your own organizations or that you've observed in others? Why don't I start with Ian?
It's a loaded question for the first person to go.
I'll come back to you at the end.
No, it's totally fine. I was kind of like, I think it'll be somebody else who gets that. I'll get to think about my answer for a little bit, and then I can come up with, the power of self-driven data is something that we are certainly looking at. I sort of mentioned or referenced a little bit before that we're really focusing down on Tableau For those of you who have used Tableau, you know that it's very a self-directed data and analytic visualization tool. For the longest time, we were in the business of building reports. So our job would be to listen to what people wanted, build a report, listen that we got it wrong, and then build it again, and then listen that we got it wrong, and then build it again. And so as we started to transform our analytics shop into sort of more focused around Tableau, something really interesting and miraculously happened. We were focused on ensuring that the data got there, and the people local to the data were able to ask the questions that they want. And what it empowered them to do is do some really interesting things about have competitions on visualizations. So who could build the best visualization of the data? What kind of experiments could we do with the data? And so, while they had their traditional, making sure that they're still producing their standard operational reports and standard operational visualizations, they were empowered to be able to go beyond simply what we provided them initially, and to push the boundaries on the questions that they could ask, push the way that that data could be displayed, and through that actually be able to, even taking the same data, not combining any new data, come up with new questions, come up with new insights that weren't present. And so when we look at the tool sets, when we look at the ability for users themselves and local people, within defined groups to be able to take that and to be empowered, you don't have to look to the future of what data I don't have. You can simply get new insight from the data you have.
So essentially an exploratory process, the capacity to get people and sort of those closest to the data or the user to explore data to draw insights.
Yeah, I look at it as sort of the next layer of Excel, which empowered people to do all kinds of things with mathematical calculations and to come up with different insights. This is an empowered tool to get people to take the data and take it even farther than they had before. And it's really, giving that power to everybody at an organization, not a select few and not a whole bunch of power users.
Yeah.
Great. So I see Fred wanting to jump in, then go to Luba, because I'm sure you have good insights on this. And also, Ryan, at the end, I'd love some reflections around the journey your own organization went around sort of the use of data visualizations and data insights, because you are a bit of a transformation story. So, sorry, Fred.
Yeah, so I wanted to pick up, thank you for setting the stage for me so nicely, and so I had the time to think on it.
A little nervous.
Yeah, in terms of, because we always talk about data literacy, the whole notion of visual literacy is so important, and sure, everybody has these data analytics tools and that, but being able to tell the story and tell the right story from the right data is so important. So like there's numerous stories of people being able to have that interactive visualization, being able to interact with your data to be able to tell the story is key in terms of that. And I think that is the piece that is most important when you're talking about data analytics on its own. It's not the analytics that's important, it's the action that's going to be driven from that analytics. And if you're going to be taking an action from it, or changing a process, and doing that action in an appropriate time frame, you need to have the support that you need to reinforce that decision. People want to know why you're making that decision. So that ties into some of our previous discussion with inaction. So visualization and visual literacy, which is those are the most popular courses when we've been teaching things to the government. It's always been, well, how do I use this visualization tool, rather than going beyond Excel, as we've said. Yeah.
So on the relationship between sort of the exploration of data, but also maybe going back at one point to the questions, which is, what is the potential? Comment est-ce que ça va changer la dynamique ou notre capacité de créer des programmes, des politiques, and our relationships with those in the research community who might be helping to inform those policies?
Well, I want to just talk about first
Yes.
what the bank, no, but where we have seen data analytics and big data being and real-time data being very effective. So when central banks are designing policy, they are making a rate decision. They often have to think about where is the economy going to be headed in the next 4 to 6 months. And until very recently, the data that they were using to make these decisions was quite old. I mean, they were relying on weeks or months' legs of data. But with more quicker accumulation of data and sharing of that data with policy institutions, they're being able to do more effective nowcasting, which allows them to make better or more informed decisions about how to set policy. So I think that's a great step forward in terms of more informed policy decision making. But as we get more and more quicker access to data, we have to start to wonder whether we might not overreact to the data that comes in. So, it's possible that you have some sudden blip that, if we just had not paid attention to for a month, that might have not had much impact on the economy. So we have to be a bit cautious about overreacting to data when it comes in too quickly.
Absolutely. I think I read a while ago that there were countries looking at, I believe it was online shopping data to think about the inflation rate, or to be able to draw insight on inflation rate. Opens up a whole sort of new possibility in terms of how we think about our economic reactions. Maybe also opens up some dangers. But first I'll turn to Ryan. Je sais qu'à l'intérieur de ta propre organisation, vous êtes allé à travers une transformation importante au niveau de votre capacité d'aller chercher des informations et puis d'aller chercher to really draw intelligence à partir de l'information. Could you speak a little bit about that, and then your thoughts on data analytics?
So you want to hear about our journey to how we got here?
Yeah, a little bit about sort of the experience, what it took in terms of leadership, and then mainly, and then sort of your thoughts on where do we think the potential of data analytics might be influence our capacity to impact policy, services, programs into the futures and do things differently.
Sure. So we started our data transformation journey about 10 years ago. Like most organizations, some senior manager hears about the power of data, and I love that we all laughed about that, and says, like, I want this in the organization, right? Makes sense? And oftentimes what we do is we create a data unit, right? We're all very smart people. I want this. Let's reorganize and let's rename a unit the data unit. Let's all learn about what it is, what we could do, what the power of it, etc. But because a lot of people don't understand it, we don't actually hire new skills. We don't actually create a really good mandate. We don't ask the right questions. We don't even know how to ask the right questions. And so a lot of these data units just fail. Right, and fail in government and private sector sometimes too means reorgs, right? So what do? We reorged again. We reorged again. We reorged again. Every single time we gave, and if it wasn't a reorg problem, if it wasn't a governance problem, it was a poor mandate problem, right? And so you reorg again and you give another mandate, a better, clearer one. All the way to the point where someone starts actually to open up the box and see what the data looks like, and you finally realize that the data management and data quality was actually really bad, really poor, right? I mean, I hope that this sounds familiar for a lot of people. You open up the box, you start calling it out and saying that the data is ugly, the data is not clean, and people who use it every single day, who can draw insights out of that data, really interpret this really badly. They, instead of hearing that it's poor quality, what they hear is, your baby is ugly. Right? You just called their baby ugly. And then, of course, they don't want to work with you again. And so a couple years ago, we had a new CEO that came in and started realizing the stuff that we were doing. And, do not get me wrong, I think you had to go through all these different steps because they're the logical things to try, right? And it's only when they aren't working that you have to try something unconventional. And one of the unconventional things that we did is we created this data visualization initiative. we created almost like a startup within our organization. A lot of companies do mergers or acquisitions, and it's harder to do that in a public sector, and so we bought it, right? So we created a partnership with a data startup, these programmers, University of Calgary, one of the experts in data visualizations in the world, and we brought in new skills. And we didn't bring in new skills to do what McKinsey would do. Sorry for any McKinsey fans out there, that would tell us that your process is wrong and this is what your governance structure should be. We actually focused not on process, but on a product. We built products. These were the data visualizations. We had a goal in mind: take this data and make it accessible to people. And we got real value in that, merging these new skills. So not thinking about the process, how we're going to get through approvals and all that kind of stuff, and who's going to manage what. Focus on the product, mashing up these new skills with data experts within the organization, actually created huge dividend. I mean, when you start respecting what the data says, and you start respecting that these people know what it says, then you get a different type of relationship. And so sometimes we had really positive relationships. And then sometimes we actually have really bad relationships because we're an ecosystem, right? And one of the things that started happening is you started having people compete against this data visualization initiative, right? Because it cost money, we devoted some time to it, and people started saying, we could do this faster, we could do this better. We don't need these consultants, we don't need these experts to do it. We'll just get Tableau. We'll just get Power BI. And we started seeing a lot of that happen. And what I want to say is that competition that started happening within the organization was one of the most positive things, right? When they were competing against this initiative, what they were really doing is upping their skills, upping what they could do, getting new tools in place, and starting to be able to have different conversations. And I think it's been really, really fantastic for the organization. I mean, you won't hear that many senior executives that say competition is good within the organization, but sometimes it is. In terms of initiatives, what's really fascinating is, I mean, a lot of people understand that, regulatory efficiency or new insights are really, really fantastic with data analysis. I'm a huge fan of, there's a beautiful example of like needle in a haystack. I think it came out of Alberta, where they could pinpoint the doctor that was feeding the black market for opioids because they were such an outlier for the number of prescriptions, right? All these really neat things that you could find. But the thing that I'm really liking a lot in our journey right now is we have a project right now on reconciliation using data analytics. We run as a quasi-judicial court, which means that we have transcripts. We have 60 years of transcripts. The last 25 years, we've invited more Indigenous communities to participate in that. We've had oral traditional evidence sections within our hearings now, and instead of being lost in our library somewhere, we've now analyzed all of the transcripts, and we could identify conversation spoke where, and we can actually start giving this cultural, traditional knowledge back to communities. I think that is like a really neat twist on what you could actually do with data.
I'm hoping everybody got that. It's a really powerful story, and I was really impressed the first time we heard it, or I heard the story from you. It was a really great example of new possibilities being opened up by us thinking differently around our information and our data. Je pense qu'on s'en retourne vers Kahoot. So everybody sort of get your pens ready and get your phones ready. Now time for the interactive section and skill testing for everybody around. And we have okay. And what is an important part of an algorithm? Qu'est-ce qui est une partie? Qu'est-ce qu'un algorithme? Est-ce que l'algorithme, is it a programming language, un langage de programmation? Is the sequence of precise instructions, une séquence d'instructions précises? Is it a math function, une fonction mathématique, or none of the above? And so, to you, what is an algorithm?
Yeah. Typo in the question. Typo in the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's in the unstructured information.
That's right. It's information management, yeah.
Yes. Not a data error. That was an information error. Please.
Et on va voir nos réponses. So more distribution around this one. So 3 of you thought it was a programming language. 16 of you thought it was a math function. 38 of you had the correct answer, which is une séquence d'instructions précise. And 19 of you thought none of the above. So there you go. A few more people stumped on this one. Returning to sort of the next questions, I actually want to jump to the notion of privacy and data breaches. I mean, a lot of us, I think, I'm actually responsible for the Privacy Act for the Government of Canada. So this is part of my daily life. I get the report on privacy breaches every week. But there's been a number of fairly high-profile privacy breaches or impacts of either data or privacy concerns. Dans le secteur privé, we saw recently the Caisse Populaire and the breach around that. There was a lot of privacy concerns and considerations around the whole Cambridge Analytica considerations. People like me and others are concerned around what do we do in terms of legislative or regulatory framework. In the EU, they've looked at GDPR, brought into sort of this new legal regime. People here are also looking at PIPEDA. So what are governments, regulators, others to do in a world where data is in many ways disaggregated, is fluid? How do we react in terms of setting the right frameworks or setting the right legal constructs for around privacy? Anyone want to take a first crack at this? Not the easiest one. Okay, I'll start. Luba, why don't I turn to you?
Okay. I don't have to often worry about these privacy issues because I create my data. My subjects are willingly giving us their data, and they know it's for research purposes. So I haven't had to really face that question very much, but. When it comes to trying to decide how to move forward with some sort of policy, I think it's important to ask ourselves, how are we going to involve people in average Canadians in terms of their understanding of the data that they're sharing, and whether they should have any role in deciding whether their data gets shared. So one thing I debate about is, should people have control over their data when that data has a public good? We make people pay taxes, and they don't want to do that. So why not also use people's data if it's going to lead to economic improvements or broad benefits?
So maybe pressing on that just a little bit. So some of the concerns around the Cambridge Analytica was actually posed through research questions. And then a research question sort of drew out a situation where information was accessed. What is the responsibilities of researchers and what is being done within sort of the area of researchers to ensure that information that is being drawn out for research is well protected, used in a responsible manner? Maybe I could get you to expand a little bit on that? Or not. No, I will. I'll draw out. Okay.
I can certainly jump
Ian
in. So we do a tremendous amount of research in central bank policy, and I think it goes. This is a great opportunity to tie back to data literacy. as a conversation. That, we within our organizations we're collecting data, and sometimes we choose. Well, I don't know if it's choose, but we forget where this data is coming from, or we forget the context around the background of the information that we're collecting. And I think part of our data literacy positions always have to be about this data is a collection of information about people or about actions or about things that we have a responsibility as a custodian, whether it is for the public good. We have a responsibility, custodian, just as taxpayers can hold the government accountable if they're not good custodians of tax dollars. I think we have to treat ourselves and treat the data that we have as something that is important for us to make good policy decisions, but it's also about we need to take it seriously. We need to take the use of it seriously, and we need to be responsible at all levels about why we're collecting the data and what's the important point of that. To go back to some of the reasons to sort of talk a little bit more about collecting the data and the data privacy, I think one of the things we as the public sector also have to position ourselves in the right value proposition as to why this data is important. I think we forget to do that. People give up their data willingly. I know I do it all the time for like a $15 gift card at a mall. So, there is a value proposition out there where people will be willing to consent and be okay with the data being there. And I think we have to, as public sector workers, figure out what's that? What is that a combination of? What's the value that an individual is getting out of that? What are the promises and the conditions that we're making to keep that? And then I think it's also about recourse. What's the recourse if we are not good custodians? What's the outcome? How do we hold ourselves accountable? And how do the people of Canada hold us accountable to being those good custodians?
Oh, great points. Hello, Ryan. So thoughts around privacy, stewardship, us as federal organizations and our responsibilities around privacy, and if you want, sort of thoughts around how we legislate, regulate. Maybe to you, Ryan.
I don't think I have answers to all those questions, but I do like the idea of custodians. So I was talking about transcripts and oral traditional evidence. This idea that just because we have the transcripts and it was our regulatory process does not actually mean that the stories, the cultural knowledge that are in the transcripts are actually ours. In fact, reframing to make it that we are just custodians of that is something that we really have to think about. Another one that we're actually being challenged with in our organization is when people write letters to oppose an environmental assessment, oftentimes they write their name and their phone number or their email address and their physical address, their mailing address, and we've been by default putting them onto our registry, which is open to the public. I think we have to start rethinking some of these defaults that we have, and this whole privacy conversation is actually making us rethink. I don't have a solution, and I don't have a legislative solution, but I can tell you one of the things that we did at immigration that I'm really proud about is we started doing a little bit more user research with new immigrants, refugees, precarious individuals, and we took a frame of, tri-council policy, we're just asking them questions, we're not doing medical experiments on them, we're asking for consent and all that good stuff. And what we realized is in our last, and we safeguarded around privacy as well. So we never asked for their name. We never asked them for their unique identifier with the department and any of that kind of stuff. But what we failed to realize is that our team would actually suffer through vicarious trauma by listening to those stories. And so one of the things that we started doing on our team is putting people through the Tri-Council policy, the Tri-Council training. They have online modules about ethics. And I think we have to start doing that more and more in this data-rich environment.
Right. So I'll turn to Fred, and then maybe as we're sort of on approche le moment pour les questions-réponses. Donc, je vais donner 1 minute ensuite à chacun de nos présentateurs to give any final thoughts or react to anything they've heard today, and then we'll turn to questions. So, Fred, I'll turn to you specifically on privacy, and we'll round back up at you for the last comments as well, and then turn to the audience.
Okay, so in terms of privacy, the one thing you had mentioned in your question was because of all the data breaches.
Yep.
In terms of that, because I think that that is one of the key things that has changed now is the degree of sophistication and the amount of issues in terms of cybersecurity for how data is being protected. And I think the key aspect of that is in determining what data actually needs to be stored. And you can see more organizations have put things in place for saying, because you've seen changes already with organizations saying if you actually do read through those things, what things they are storing and for how long and things like that. So I think one thing that, just to reinforce, there are always going to be breaches, and making sure that we have the right mechanisms and processes in place. And I think if we look internationally, that cannot be just us in Canada. We have to look internationally in terms of bringing all those things together as well.
That's great.
Yeah. So did you want...
Why don't we, if you have final thoughts, then we can sort of
so the final thoughts in terms of this, because again, if I just wanted to sum up, I think the important thing for me always remembering is that data, we've always had data for a long time. People don't talk enough about the aspects of information and knowledge, which is things that we have also dealt with a long time, and how we've dealt with conflicting information and knowledge. The big challenge we've had now has been to do with the growth. I would say the key takeaway is to remember that that it is humans that are putting the processes in place and humans that are using the data. Granted, machines are creating the data, and if we wanted to, we can let machines self-drive around and use the data, but ultimately, it is in terms of humans that are putting the guidelines in terms of what mechanisms we want to put in place for keeping ourselves, the humans, in control. I think that's the first point, and the second one is that whole notion of the whole reason that's bringing us together today is that aspect of literacy, knowing what does data mean for my day-to-day work life, whether I'm a user of that data or a generator of that data.
Absolutely.
So I want to just build on that last point. I think there's a very important role for all levels of education to develop these data skills. I mean, not just handling data, but also understanding what is the data that could be there, what kind of data do we still need to create. And that will lead to a more data literate population or workforce that will know how to build their own data sets within their own institutions. I think sometimes we get overconfident about the data that we have, that we think that it can answer the questions that we're trying to tackle. But we need to be developing critical skills at all these different levels of education. And to be open to alternative ways of creating data. So be it through lab experiments, through surveys.
Yeah, no, good points. And Ian?
I think for me, I'm just excited about the ability that we're having these conversations, that we're driving to better ourselves, that we're driving to better the questions we ask so that we can better Canadians. I think a lot of us show up so that we can make our world around us better. And by trying to solve these problems, they're not easy ones, but trying to solve these problems, we're continuing to drive to that goal that I think we all have, which is to serve and to make the world around us better. And I think if we always keep that vision together, the challenges, while difficult and sometimes confusing, and sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, we will always end up in the right place and making the right decisions.
Ryan, dernière pensée à ce sujet?
All really, really great points. It's scary to think that privacy breaches are always going to happen. And I think thinking that through a little bit more and realizing that we are going to trip we are going to fall, we are going to fail, and how do we actually take the time to fail forward is something that we really have to, like, it's not always about efficiency. I think we have to spend time and carve out that space to learn from our mistakes.
Donc, je pense qu'on arrive à la période des questions. Quelques pensées à laisser avec les gens ici. There is no doubt that the environment around us has shifted. There is no doubt that our capacity to use, leverage effectively data will be key to our capacity to do better for citizens. And not only will it be key to us being able to do better, it will be necessary for us to have the skills purely to react to our environment and to be able to continue being effective governments, which in turn is central to our capacity to maintain credibility and trust with citizens. So our skills and our capacity to operate well in a data-rich and quickly evolving environment is really central to our capacity to be effective governments. So this is, I think, an issue for the ages and for our age right now, and I'm happy that you're all sort of here collectively tackling with us. Donc maintenant, j'espère que vous avez gardé vos questions. Je vais regarder nos gens derrière, est-ce qu'on va en ligne ou est-ce qu'on a les questions? So maybe we'll start. Do we have questions in the audience? And I see one in the back. Oui, les microphones sont ici, donc il y a quelqu'un qui va venir avec vous avec le micro.
Hi, I'm just coming from hosting a lunch and learn within my team on experimentation. Mm-hmm. And data is the fuel for good experimentation. So how might we design better teams so that we're more effective at weaving the data that we're collecting into the problems, into the questions we're asking and the problems that we're trying to solve? Do you think this is solely the job of data analysts, or like how do we give us some practical tools on how we do this? Because we're really advocating for good experimentation. We're running labs, we're doing all this innovation, but we have to come up with actually intentional ways to use this data.
Yeah. If I can because that's exactly the kind of environment we see pretty much on a daily basis in terms of that, whether it be in like, whether it be everything from a hackathon to like a summer course or anything like that. So the challenge, and if you take a look at it in the literature and even in the visual analytics literature, the storytelling, they talk about the importance of multidisciplinary teams. So the real value which we have seen, and if you take a look at the literature people have seen, is when you have people with different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds, able to work together at solving a problem in terms of that. Mm-hmm. The essential thing is you have to have the subject matter experts that know what questions to ask of that data, but sometimes that person will not be the technical expert, so you need to have that person that knows how do I bring this data source in together with this source to be able to use with this tool. But it's not just, so even by just having a group of 2 people, from those, if you had to do that, you could even do something with a group of 2 people, and I've seen that being quite effective as well as the usual thing of getting a larger group of people and working on what are real problems, and you need to know that you have the data that can help inform those questions.
And one of the things I'm sure you're hearing quite a bit in terms of in these and other venues is the power of multidisciplinary teams, the power of combining technical expertise with policy views with other points of view and sort of collapsing that. I think that is a strong refrain you'll hear from the school and others around this space. Experimentation, were there others that wanted to?
So what we do with a lot of our experiments within my teams is while we may not necessarily have all the answers right away, we pick the first thing that will tell us that we failed. So a lot of the times we spend time focusing on what are some quick wins. Like you'll hear that a lot. What's a quick win? And what I've tried to shift the focus is what will tell us that this is a terrible idea. We should all pack ourselves up and go off and do something else. And what that has resulted in is that you get past that first failure and then you pick the next one. And then you pick the next one. And sooner rather than later, you notice that you're succeeding rather than saying, I'm still struggling. And that sometimes in experimentation is often the most effective way to start.
I just want to add that I think there should be space or scope for failure. So we learn far more from failing than succeeding. And so budgeting for that, both in terms of time and resources, would be one step towards encouraging more experimentation.
Can I jump in?
Of course.
It's so easy to say interdisciplinary teams, multidisciplinary teams, really hard to create, really hard to do. And it takes a long time. You have to hire people that are not you, that don't have your academic background, that don't look like you, that don't think like you. It is an impulse that we all have to just hire people that think like us, right? That way they'll know how to do the analysis that we want done.
Hire co-op students.
So we did this really well at immigration. We had anthropologists, we had behavioral scientists, data scientists, designers, human-computer interaction people. But another one that was really surprising, we ended up having the most of this unit, this discipline, were social workers. Social workers as a vocation work with people that are having difficulties interacting with government. And they were taught how to do that. I thought that was a really interesting skill that we just kept hiring and hiring. So not only finding the people, I think, is really important, but also how you do your interview process. So we had a two-stage interview process. One where they got tested on their technical abilities, and then the second where they actually did a job talk. So we gave them a problem. They had to explain how their discipline views that problem and how they could help the team. And we just drilled them with questions, right? So if you belittled an anthropologist and said, qualitative data means nothing, then you weren't right for our team, right? If you just ignored everything that they said and just stuck with your disciplinary way of thinking, you didn't belong on the team. You had to be able to riff off of what other people were saying. And we did that on purpose. It took much longer to hire. But it's well worth it.
I just want to add that I think what's really critical is to have a common language between within a multidisciplinary group, because the terminology that a computer scientist will have for the same thing as an economist is completely different, and we're going to have more challenges trying to move forward together. So perhaps there can be some way of building a common education within the institution, even though there are diverse backgrounds.
So, merci. Je vais passer aux questions Slido. How can we advance data use within government when there are so many security barriers within government, and when looking at emerging technologies? I'll turn to the panelists, but I think there's probably a portion of that question that is for me as well. So I'll look if there's initial thoughts from any of the panelists at the intersection between sort of security, emerging technologies, and how do we leverage them in that context?
It's hard. It's a relationship. It's a bit like vacuum sales. Like, it is door to door. It takes a lot of effort to get things out of the door. Even in the bank, where we have a lot of opportunities and spaces for experimentation, to translate those into productionalized tools, it takes a lot. I think you have to be passionate. You have to have a value proposition and an outcome that aligns very succinctly to whether it be an entente or a particular strategy that's going on. You need to sell it. You'll get there, and the nice thing is that you'll open the door for people behind you. Yep. But it's a lot of grunt work, a lot of boots on the ground, a lot of talking people and convincing people. And really scoping what you want to do to a very small subset and then growing from there. Very iterative approach.
Just to add in one thing, you could just replace the within government within a large organization. You see it within private organizations as well. And one way that I've noticed some organizations getting around that when they have a problem that they want to solve is actually going to the outside with a lot of open data or open tools where if the problem is, I guess part of the thing is it just moving the data around within the organization that's difficult, or is actually using the new tool inside the organization, because so there's a range of questions there, but looking to the outside can sometimes help on the inside.
Luba or Ryan, any of you want to jump into this one?
I like this open data movement. I also really like how a lot of journals now require you, before you're able to publish in that journal, to say where you're going to put your open data. And not just your open data, you have to publish your code.
Yep.
Right? Publishing your code is now a requirement in some of the biggest journals out there. I think we have to be more transparent about the algorithms and the code that we actually use to come up with our analysis. So I play the chief privacy officer hat in this, as well as like chief analytics officer. And whether or not that's always a good thing, I'm liking it, but maybe sometimes I have to be challenged about what I'm able to release. But rethinking about what our classifications are for our documents, for our data, is something that we really have to think through. We overprotect, we overclassify a lot, and we do that for our documents, and we do that for our data, and the more we could actually publish into open data, the better it is.
So maybe to me, going back to some of the questions. So the first sort of portion of that question was the existence of barriers. And I think we all, sort of as people who want to take a leadership space in the digital data space, need to push on what those barriers are a little bit. Sometimes they're real, and sometimes they're there for good reasons, and sometimes they are perceived or cultural. So worth testing and pushing on those barriers. The sort of other part of that is we have to start celebrating and learning from the successes of others. We are using AI in government at various places. We are using blockchain. We are using emerging technologies. We are doing things that are innovative from a data side. Being able to recognize and celebrate them and bring those forward to the senior leaders, if you're the senior leaders or if you're working for one, and show them the potential is part of selling the value proposition. And then I guess I wanted to sort of highlight one thing we did, which was, in one way, might be perceived as a barrier, but I think for us is enabling. We brought forward an algorithmic impact assessment, and that is intended to provide the rule sets or things you are to be doing in questionnaires that you should be entering when you're going to be doing automated decision making. That could be by some perceived as a barrier to doing automated decision. I'd actually say in many ways that is giving permission. That is institutionalizing within the Government of Canada what we should be doing in terms of a roadmap, so that when you're talking to your senior leaders, you're able to say, well, you know, we tested how we will be using automated decision within our systems. It meets sort of like the Government of Canada guidelines, and so we have an implicit permission to use in those types of contexts. So I guess a few messages. Push through the barriers, like think about whether they're real barriers and whether they're cultural. Celebrate the successes, and then let's share some of our best practices so that we're able to replicate some of those successes around and establish sort of common ground rules on how we use these technologies in spaces where maybe they're a little uncomfortable for us at the beginning, but they will become more and more and more and more and are already an important part of our fact of everyday life. Prochaine question. How can we, and we touched a little bit about this, so how can we as the public service make our government data more open, accessible, and transparent to the public and academia?
Well, one thing that I find as an academic who wants to get access to data, it's not always clear what data is available. So you can navigate through StatsCan's website, and it's all there, but you have to really dig into the details of each survey to really find out what variables are there. Just a better search algorithm would help me to better access or identify data.
So better tools.
Yeah.
We can make better tools available. Thoughts from our other panel members?
Well, just in terms of that, I think that this ties in with the observation I had about open data, and I think that the the important thing to take a look at is seeing, again, what has been done by other organizations internationally. How have other governments made that information available so that we can learn from their mistakes and see how we can improve what we're doing. I know we're already doing it, but let's, again, build on what we've been seeing working and not working elsewhere.
I mean, for the bank, we have sort of two sides of this. One, we make a lot of our publicly available data, or publicly produced or made data available through API. So you can actually query most of the publicly available bank data through using our externally facing API. So we're currently continuing to expand that and look at how we make that economic data readily available. And another area is really we've pushed towards the cloud and creating a space where we can work with partners and work with other groups outside to collaborate on research projects or solve questions. And what that has taken is a relationship with our security groups to understand what data is allowable in that environment, what does that mean from a reputational perspective, and really sort of be responsible about that space and clear about the expectations of use within that space.
Ryan, any thoughts?
Senior management needs to put resources towards this. They have to hire data engineers. It is just as important to hire data engineers and to do extracts as it is to hire data scientists, for one. The second that I would say is a lot of public servants should learn a little bit of coding and learn how to scrape websites.
Yep.
No, all good advice. I think I'll pick up on the point of API. I mean, as we are thinking and redesigning and thinking about our applications or services, good design says think about an API, and that's a good way to share information out. I also have sort of under my area of responsibility, I would say OpenGov generally is a thematic in the Open Government Portal. And we've gone through now a phase where I would say we were focused on trying to push a lot of information out there. We also need to think about what is the highest value data sets for Canadians. There's the Stats Canada data sets, which are highly rigorous survey-based. Departments have a lot of other data sets, whether they be geospatial, whether they be data sets from administrative data that we have. Need to be thinking in our own organization, what are the sets of data that would be of greatest use to the public, and put a bit of effort into pushing those out into various portals or public availability.
There's a question.
Oui, question de la salle.
I want to go back to maybe on, it was social licensing of use of data. So you mentioned that we as public servants, we can hear from the, let's say, Privy Council's clerk that we should be more experimental with data. But at the end of the day, we're all citizens, right? The citizens will never accept, let's say, use of private facial recognition data unless someone bears the responsibility to risk social capital to make that decision and make it a clear statement. This is a little bit political, but how about we do that without, let's say, someone risking political, social capital, just to make us accept as a society that some of this data needs to be used? Because otherwise we're playing against time, against other countries that have this ability.
I'd be happy to start off the conversation, not conclude it in any way. It goes back to that value proposition, right? Like, we use Snapchat all the time, and we have it do facial recognition and put augmented reality on. We're giving data away every time we do that. Whether or not we agree to it or not, the data is being captured, and a certain portion of it is being used to either see which cat face you like better than the other one. And so the question around social contract and a question about fair usage and whether or not we engage is, what's the value proposition that we as the Canadian government and we as the public sector are going to give you, a Canadian citizen, for your data? If we simply capture facial recognition data because we think you're going to be safer and we're going to make you safer, that's not a value proposition anyone's going to sign up for. It's actually a value proposition that everybody's going to rally against. And so the question is, but if you look at whether it be digital health, right? So if I have the ability to go to my doctor, get a prescription, then go to my pharmacist, and they've already filled out the prescription, that is a value proposition a lot of people will sign up for. So you can get data, you've now transmitted data, you've now created a connection between that data, those two data points. There's a lot of data sharing happening, but no one's upset about it because I'm getting something out of it. And so what is our value proposition? Where do we stand on the value that we as a government collecting this data provide Canadian citizens? And so that's sort of where I see it being around that.
Yep. I'll add to that. I mean, I think in my mind, there's three components to the answer. There's the articulating of the value proposition, making it a real value proposition. There's providing assurance that we have reasonable safeguards. And then there's an ongoing dialogue for citizens so that they understand what is the value proposition, what are those safeguards, and have trust in the government's capacity to use and safeguard that information. And so there's obviously data sets or sources of information that will be highly sensitive. And where it will take longer, more effort, more safeguards. But there's also areas where we could be exchanging information or using information that does not have that same high level of sensitivity, and where we could be doing better. So there's an iterative component to that. Katie?
I just want to add that I think it's important that we actually ask Canadians what it is that you're afraid of by sharing your data. What are you worried about risking if we do this? Because they may not even be very aware of what the risks are, and that a sense of what is going to influence their impressions of data sharing is going to be helpful in us designing a policy in that regard.
I would say I like picking up on the value proposition. There's so often that already people are sharing information if there's a positive value proposition to them, like if it means that they can get through the queue faster or something like that. So I think for reaching out to whether it be an organization or an individual, showing the value proposition is the key thing, and that will vary from individual to individual, and you have to recognize there's no one value proposition that will work for every set of customers or every set of group, and focusing on what's the group you're going after and what's the best value for them.
Ryan, you won't see, I'm actually looking at you on the screen over there, so as I'm looking there, I'm not ignoring you. So if you want to jump in, just give me a sign.
Sure. I think, yes, safeguards are about sharing and all that kind of stuff, but also safeguards about what questions you're asking. Right? So what are you optimizing, right? There is a difference if you're optimizing based on equality versus equity. And so having those skills in your team, having those conversations, having rigorous conversations, I think actually gives us social license as well, or helps to get social license.
Je pense qu'on a le temps pour une dernière question avant les mots de fermeture. Donc, to all panel members, considering the age of GOC employees, what are your suggestions on reluctance to change, and what do you recommend to influence the change? I don't know what the average age of I think the average age of a GOC employee is about 42, 43, so close to my age, so I don't know what that means. Views on generational divides and advice.
I mean, I come from an interesting perspective on this, because I literally just had a one-on-one this morning with an individual who's retiring, who is learning Python, who's learning APIs, who's getting involved in projects, who's doing things she's never done before, and she's actually more engaged, more happy than she's been. She told me this morning she might not retire. And so, you know, I think we make a lot of assumptions that it's age-based. Yeah. And we have to be careful about it, because it goes to that, there's a couple of questions in here about undisturbed bias, like our bias, right? We assume that because people have done, you know, things the same way for years, that they always want to do the same things. And I think it's about engaging them. It's about understanding why they would be reluctant or what they feel the barriers are. But sometimes it's just saying, you know what, learn it. There's no pressures. Figure out what you want to do, and then and away they go. Sometimes I have resistance to change to some of my youngest people, because they're like, well, no, I don't want to do it that way because I did it this way in school. And I'm like, well, this isn't school. And so, I think it really depends on the situation of the individual, and we have to treat each individual independently and treat to what they need out of that proposition to encourage that change.
Really brief, just in terms of that, I think that the great thing to do is finding a way for people more closer to my age, when they're closer to retirement, in terms of that, finding new ways of doing your transforming your job into something that is new and exciting, because it's quite often people are stuck in a well-specified role, making it easier, more flexible, say, for people to be seconded into another role for a period of time in the government or something like that. I've seen that in other organizations that has worked for being able to get more out of an individual. Yeah.
I think that if you make it clear how that employee can benefit from these new skills, and they see their job made easier or done faster, that may be sufficient to get them going.
Ryan, any thoughts?
I think the one mechanism that I love in the public service is being used with I suspect it's still being used with the public sector innovation task force, is reverse mentors. So having non-EXs on these senior level committees that act as reverse mentors for deputy ministers is one of the best things I think has ever happened in the public sector.
Maybe the one thing I can add to the thought is I am actually not a huge fan of the traditional change agent model, which has a senior leader in the organization sort of standing up in front of people and saying, "Come hell or high water, I will drive change." I think if enough people are telling you that's the wrong change, you should be listening. And I think part of the strength or the best ways sometimes where change is driven is from the ground up, and it's from engaging sort of people with a lot of different views. So I don't actually think it's an age-driven thing. I think we need to all collectively think about working across various profiles around various capacities to do things that make sense, and then to celebrate when we have small victories so that we can build on those and eventually drive a bigger change. I see we have one question in the crowd, so we'll take sort of a last question here from the floor, and then I think we will be up against time.
Okay, so I'm an analyst. I have data, and I'm thinking there must be a better way to organize this and to make sense out of it. I used to be a librarian, so I've developed tools myself, but my skills only go so far. So I've often wondered, how do you get experts to come in and help you or figure out how to manage the data? Is there an internal consulting organization in the public service that could help us?
To the best of my knowledge, there is no internal consulting organization for the whole of government. The closest we have is CDS, that is doing, particularly around services, a fantastic job in terms of demonstrating the capacity. A lot of organizations, individual departments are building strong internal capacities around innovation, around data. Some organizations have developed CDOs. I think the answer is we are all right now working to catch up and build capacity. And it's a little uneven across the federal civil service, but it's a capacity we know we need to build. And I guess the one place I would look to people is go look at some of our communities of practices. There's a community of practice around data. It exists. You will find it on GC Connects, GC Collab. I have a number of analysts who are on there. They're a good resource. So as opposed to having a central consultancy, I would say, what you do have is communities of practice of people interested in the topic that are exchanging views, exchanging best practices, and in many cases that are willing to sort of exchange their time or spend their time in terms of helping others. You may want to look around this room as well. So you've got a series of people who've demonstrated that they have an interest and desire to learn, including yourself, in this space. Sort of those who are interested as well, and build. My suggestion would be build some of those contacts and capacities by reaching out and talking to your colleagues.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just we built that intern. That's actually my role inside the university, is leading that, and it's now gone to outside the university, which is why we're engaged with government departments, organizations, and things like that. Yeah.
Great. So it's somewhat of an informal ad hoc thing, or is it a more?
No, it's a formal thing. That's one of the main focuses of our big data initiative. So feel free to give me a phone call, email. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
And don't feel afraid of crowdsourcing it. A lot of my team reaches out to Reddit, Stack Overflow, a lot of different websites out there that people will give you the idea for free or the response for free. And it's a real way to connect with people who are doing data around the world. And we found it very beneficial. There are also a whole bunch of different learning resources out there through YouTube and Udemy and lynda.com that for a relatively small fee allow you further training. So I think the resources are out there, both internally and externally, for you to get the answers to your questions.
Okay, thanks.
Bon, on est légèrement par-dessus le temps et donc je pense que j'aimerais commencer par remercier nos panélistes d'être ici aujourd'hui. Thank you all. It was a really informative session. J'aimerais peut-être une main d'applaudissement pour nos panélistes. Merci. You're embarking on a bit of an adventure here. The government and the federal civil service and the school in particular is putting a lot of energy and a lot of thought and a lot of desire in terms of wanting to upskill civil servants, upskill our own capacities around digital and data. So there's a few upcoming events that I wanted to flag. So the Canada School and the Digital Academy will be hosting an Open Government Forum on November 26. The focus will be on innovation and disruption. You can sign up online. There is a TBS Living Digital event on December 3rd, so keep an eye out for the invitation. The CSPS will send you the links to sign up in their newsletter. As well as for executives in the room today, you may want to attend an event being organized by the Canadian Institute of Health Research and Institute of Genetics. And the British UK Science and Innovation Network. It's called UK Perspectives on Generation and Sharing of Clinical and Genomics Data, and it's planned for November 25th. And they've invited experts to Ottawa for a Canada-UK Clinical and Genomics Data Sharing Research Workshop. So there's a lot of activities, a lot of opportunities to learn, beaucoup d'opportunités d'apprentissage formel, mais aussi je vous encourage à bâtir vos réseaux, à parler avec vos collègues qui sont ici dans la salle, à nous parler, à parler aux panélistes aujourd'hui pour essayer de trouver les ressources and together we can sort of build our collective knowledge in this space. Thank you, and thank you for investing the time today.
Very nice job, moderator. Thank you.